Alafia, I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. And one of these days soon, we're going to play more of our theme song, which is Umoja, and it's written by Kwame Steve Cobb, and his beautiful wife, Chabanduka, is on that CD. It's called The Seven Principles. And I'm very pleased that he allows me to use his music without paying royalties, because I really do enjoy the music. And today I want you to know that you're going to enjoy this show, because I have my very special guest, Mr. Spencer Leak Sr. of Leak & Sons Funeral Homes. I'm so happy to finally have you on the show.
I'm so happy to be finally on the show.
Right.
We've been trying to get this done for a long time.
Right, and you're a very busy person, so I really appreciate you for coming.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me.
And I know that you're a familiar face and that everyone knows who you are, but I want to just tell my viewers a little something about you. You know who you are and you know these things,
Yeah.
but I want to say these things. He was born on income tax day.
That's
That just, I'll never forget your birthday.
That's right.
And your father actually started with the Unity Funeral Home.
That's correct.
And eventually it became the A.R. Leak Funeral Home.
That's correct.
You went to Worsham College of Mortuary Science.
That's
I know a few people who went there.
Mm-hmm.
You were part of a protest at the Oakwood Cemetery, which was at that time racially segregated.
Yes, it was, yes.
Something I want to ask you, because I saw something on the news about the auction of the Borough Cemetery and the Cedar Park Cemetery, and I want to know why it is that funeral homes don't own cemeteries, because it seems to me that it should be that way.
Well, the reason why they conflict with a funeral home who owns a cemetery, other funeral directors maybe have a problem with recommending that particular cemetery to families.
Okay.
I don't see it as a conflict of interest. The fact that, in fact, I've always thought that with the problems that Borough Cemetery had, that a group of us funeral directors should have gotten together and purchased some land and really opened up a new cemetery, possibly naming it after Martin Luther King, who I have tremendous respect for. But I felt that the funeral directors had the obligation to their clientele, because we see the families before they go to the cemetery, that we should really have a cemetery in our city that people would have the confidence to know that once a burial that takes place there, that there would not be the problems that emanated out of the Borough situation.
Right.
So, but I think it's based upon the fact that a funeral home may find it uncomfortable recommending a cemetery owned by another funeral director because of the issue of competition. I don't feel that I am competing with any of my colleagues who are in the funeral business or in the cemetery business. I feel that what God has for me, that there's no one else would be able to receive what God intends for me to receive. So therefore, I don't consider myself in competition.
I thought also that churches ought to be interested in cemeteries. I'm from the South.
Sure.
And the church that my father and his family built had the cemetery right next door, right behind it.
Oh, sure. Well, that's our history in the South, where and not only our people, but other ethnic groups, whites in the South also, they were buried in the local church cemetery. And so that's our history, and I don't see why a cemetery could not be owned in a nonprofit status by churches or a group of churches.
Well, I hope that idea will be pursued, because I'd like to see that happen.
I think there's a need for another cemetery in this area that the people would have the confidence to utilize.
Yes.
but maybe that may happen.
Well, that may happen, and now that we've planted the seed, it may happen sooner.
True.
Okay. You have been president of the Leak and Sons Funeral Home since 1970.
Well, actually, I was vice president under my father,
Okay.
A.R. Leak Sr.
Okay.
And then in 1993, when he made his transition, then I became the president and CEO of
Okay.
Leak and Sons Funeral
Okay.
Home.
All right. You have an MS in criminal justice from Chicago State University. You're an
Yes.
alumni.
Yes,
Okay.
right. Yeah, they have an excellent criminal justice program there.
Okay. Which, of course, had to have something to do with your being the executive director of the Cook County Department of Corrections.
Yeah, had a lot to do with it, yes.
Yeah. You had to have seen a lot when you were executive director of Cook County Department of Corrections. You were not the warden, so you weren't actually in the jail with the day-to-day.
Oh, yes. On the contrary, I was.
You were.
I was not the warden, as you say.
Right.
In the county jail system, the various jails have superintendents who are in charge of the particular, but I was the director, executive director of the jail. So therefore, I was there on a daily basis and sometimes spending 12, 14, 16 hours a day at the jail. Even though they had superintendents of various divisions at the jail, I was just a hands-on type director where I wanted to be there if there were problems emanating. Even though I had confidence in my superintendents, I wanted to be there to deal with the everyday problems. And believe me, at the Cook County Department of Corrections, those problems were numerous and difficult problems to deal with. And so I wanted to be there standing behind my superintendents as they dealt with the day-to-day problems in their particular division. And then the issues dealing with the Department of Correction as a whole, I had to deal with those also.
I can understand why you became a funeral director, but I don't know why you went into criminal justice.
Well, I wanted to, after going and getting my degree in funeral service, then I had children, and I wanted my children to be able to see their dad matriculate from some university. So I was a good friend to Dr. Kitty Kidd Robinson of Chicago State University.
I was her friend as well.
And so Dr. Robinson and I sat down and we talked about me coming to Chicago State, and she suggested that I think about corrections. And it was a godsend for us to have that conversation, because I did, and I went into corrections, and the rest is history. I was
Yeah,
able
you had
to.
quite a career in that. Black on Black Love, you're the chairman of Black on Black Love.
Yes, that organization was founded by Ed Gardner, the
Yes,
founder and
one of my
president and
colleagues.
CEO of Soft. It's an organization I always supported when I was at the jail and through my other criminal justice appointments. And so when Mr. Gardner decided to step down, they asked me if I would, and I just jumped at the opportunity, because I felt that the goals of the organization were those that I was definitely in agreement with and consistent with my beliefs as to how to deal with crime prevention. Because my concern at the jail was these young people who were inmates there. I knew that the things had not been done in their past when they were very young that might have prevented them from being inmates at the jail. So I wanted to do something even then about crime prevention, and then afterward, definitely, I'm just committed to that.
That's what you call a Renaissance man.
I hope so.
Yes, I think so. And then, of course, you have your weekly radio program on 1390. It's Time Truth Speaks.
That's correct.
And you've been doing that for how long?
Over 45 years.
Over 45
My
years.
dad began the program, and then on several Sundays through throughout the year, he would allow me to be on the broadcast, and then I would say something controversial, and people would call and complain about it, and Dad would say, well, hey, you take off a little while, then I'd come back, say something controversial again. And so my dad and I had that type of understanding that he would be the good cop, and sometime I had to be the bad cop.
Which led to the commentaries that led to the compilation of this volume called It's Time Truth Speaks. I want to talk to you a lot about the contents of this book, but I want to tell you why you wrote the book.
Okay.
And actually, I want to tell the audience why you wrote the book. You knew, because I took this as a direct quote right out of the book. But of all the things that you've said and all of the things that I read, you said this dark and untoward generation is so filled with subterfuge, deceit, and lies that those who have the truth must be the light in this dark and evil world. Now that just summed it up.
Yeah.
That just summed it up. You looked over the landscape and this is what you saw, and you saw the need for light. Hence you saw the need to produce this volume, not just as a weekly commentary, but to bring it together in under one cover so that people could have access to it. And I just saw so many things of interest in it, and I hope we can get through them. The first thing that just jumped right off the page was this discussion that you had where you compared accidents with providence.
Yeah.
Asking the question, is there such a thing as an accident? Now you go from there, because you know what you said.
Well, I've always noticed, especially in my business, they are natural deaths, homicide, and then there are accidental deaths. And the definition of accidents is an event, an incident that takes place without any knowledge or any forethought or any involvement by the person who was the victim of that accident. And I took issue with that fact, in that I don't believe that there's such a thing as the accident. There is no word for accident in the Bible. I use that as an example. If a person who is drinking and he gets inebriated and he thinks, because of the alcohol in his system, that he can drive just as well inebriated as he can naturally, he gets in the car and he drives and he hits a tree. Now the police would characterize that as an accident, but I just characterize it as an incident that the victim played a major role in, and therefore he was responsible for his actions, and his actions are not accidental, because had he not engaged in that type of activity, he would not have found himself in the position that he was in. So our young people, our young girls who involved with our young boys and have affairs where pregnancy occurs, they are quick to call that an accident. Well, it's not an accident. There was intention by them to engage in that type of act, and the ramifications of that most often will wind up in unwanted pregnancies. And we're looking at our nation since Roe v. Wade, over 40 million abortions. A third of those are by black young women, and we're talking about 40 million accidents, or we're talking about 40 million incidents that could have been prevented had those who engaged in activities thought about the consequences of their actions.
And in your chapter, How Much Fruit Have We Lost?
Yes.
I have to go from there to your pro-life, pro-choice exposition in your book.
Well, I believe we've lost so much fruit, and the chapter emanates out of what I had hoped that our president would have stated at the commencement addressed to the students at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of protesting, as you know, because of his pro-choice position and the university's pro-life position. And I just wanted to, I'd hoped that the president would deal with that. He dealt with it from the point that he felt that our young people should get the type of education that would cause them not to engage in that. But I just felt that he missed the point. I think he missed the point because of the fruit that we have lost, the possibility that the inventor of the vaccine for AIDS might have been lost by some young woman not seeking to bring her pregnancy to fruition, and we may have lost the inventor of the vaccine for cancer or AIDS or heart disease. How do we know how much fruit we've lost? And that fruit was not allowed to manifest. And are we a better nation for it? I think we are not a better nation because of 40 million lives that have been lost through the abortion process.
You make a very strong argument for pro-life. In fact, when you say that the solutions to all of the problems that we faced, we have had access to the solutions, but we keep sending them back.
Yes,
That, you know, those lives that we do not allow to come into being may have been, as just as you just said, you know, they may have brought the cure for some dreaded disease, or may have had an answer that we needed.
God creates us for a particular purpose, to declare His will, and to declare His will in certain areas. He calls doctors, He calls lawyers, and it's my opinion that we lost so many millions of God's purposes for this world that He created, and who knows in what areas that those particular laws could have prevented some of the ills that plague society, so many of the ills that plague society now.
Well, you're a relatively young man, so I don't know if you remember Dr. T.R.M. Howard.
Yes.
Dr. T.R.M. Howard performed abortions.
He did perform abortions, and I serviced his family when he passed away. And so I knew him well, and I knew his family well. And there was a debate. Reverend Jesse Jackson at the time was pro-life, and he eulogized Dr. Howard, and he dealt with that debate that they had. And Dr. Howard felt that it was a woman's right to choose. And I think it was a legitimate position for Dr. Howard to take. However, I supported Reverend Jesse Jackson at the time, who in his pro-life position. But I just felt that, and I still do, that we have lost so much out of that Supreme Court decision that allowed a woman to have that. I think a woman can have a choice. She should have a choice, but that I was hoping that choice would be to allow that baby to live. And then the fathers of those babies, we have not done enough to deal with the fact that they have impregnated those women and then left them using, hoping that they would use that pregnancy or abortion as a birth control device. These men are to be condemned and to be cursed for leaving those women in a position where they had to make that unfortunate choice, and so many chose abortion rather than life. Well, those men cannot escape the consequences of their action.
I believe that I was present at that debate, And I remember that Dr. Howard said, because I was so disappointed with him, because in many ways he was such a fine man.
Oh,
He
no doubt
supported
about
the
it.
civil rights struggle. He was a black man and very proud of
Yes,
it.
he was.
But he said that when ministers stopped impregnating their parishioners, when old men stopped impregnating minor girls, and he just ticked off the number of people that he was seeing because they had been exploited by people who ought to know better.
Oh, sure.
You know, and so he stood his ground, because he said somebody has to do this.
Yeah.
Until these people are prevented from committing these crimes against women, then somebody has to do this. So it was not justifiable, but it was explained. He
He
explained
explained
his
it,
reasons.
but I still
Well,
feel
of
that.
course. I was just, clearing.
Yes,
I brought him up, and I was
remember.
not going to desecrate his.
He's a civil rights icon.
Right,
I
right.
admired him. I
Right.
admired him, but that aspect of his medical career,
Right.
I just could not
Right.
agree with.
Right. I wanted to ask you. I'm back to accidents versus providence
Okay.
again, and I wanted to mention to you and then ask you about this. There was an episode where you were invited over to Reverend Meek's church,
Yes.
and you and your wife Henrietta were given a $10,000 check because you serviced 8 of the families of the E2 victims, and you, instead of using that money to defray the costs of your services, you gave it to a scholarship fund for the children of the victims.
Victims of each.
Now, accidents versus providence. My feeling, my strong feeling is that the city ought to have to take some responsibility, because when you watch the videotape, you see firefighters and other people in uniforms who are walking back and forth while those people's faces are pressed
Well, I
against
agree
the
with you.
glass.
I agree with
and they're
you.
not being rescued.
I
so,
agree with you.
know, surely accidents this is to you an incident and not an accident. This was
Right.
ordained.
Because it could have been prevented. First of all, what a lot of people didn't realize is that a fight broke out on the floor of the E2 nightclub. Everything was peaceful until the fight broke out. And what we have to understand is that when that fight, we have to prevent fights from breaking out, not only in the E2 nightclub, but we've got to prevent fights from breaking out on the streets of Chicago, as well as in Kabul, Baghdad,
In Iraq.
Baghdad. The fight that broke out started the series of events that led to the tragedy. Therefore, the fight that broke out was not an accident, and that's my point. The events that led to the event, when the fight broke out, that the guy used a pepper spray, and then there was
Started a
shock,
stampede.
but the fight itself that broke out could have been prevented, and all fights could be prevented. And fights breaking out, and I did that in a commentary about the E2 tragedy that's not in the book, but it will be in a subsequent book, where I dealt with the fact that the reason was that fight breaking out between 2 individuals that caused all of those people to lose their lives. Could something have been done to prevent that fight from breaking out? And that's why the E2 tragedy is not an accident.
And in that context, that was during a time when there was a lot of scare. There was just fear was in the air for something happening. You know, that was a particular period where people were on edge in the first place.
Yes.
And so for some gaseous type odor to suddenly start, spreading around in the environment would be a very would actually be just a terrifying thing.
Oh, sure.
A traumatizing
but
thing.
that odor emanating from the pepper spray only came because a fight broke out.
Right.
And so the point I was making is we cannot allow fights to break out.
Okay.
Because then they have consequences that some may characterize as accidents, but I just characterize them as incidents emanating from a preventable situation.
Well, now we're looking at God's will juxtaposed to people's choices, because the two individuals who engaged in the fight chose to engage in the fight.
Exactly.
Inside, outside of the will of God. What say you?
God's will is paramount, but man has choices that are juxtaposed against God's will. And God's will eventually, because God knew from the foundation of the earth that a fight would break out in E2. The people who had the ability to step away from that fight made a choice. And so my point has always been that it's because of our choices, our God-given choices, that occurs in consequences, but the consequences emanate out of our choices, but our choices are given to us by God, who gives us the will to make those choices. But God's paramount will be done eventually. And then we'll understand it, as the old folks say, better.
By and by.
By and by. But right now, we have to understand that nothing happens outside of the will of God. Although our choices that we make brings those actions about. But they're never outside the will of God.
Okay. All right. I'm not putting you to a test. I'm just asking you the things that you've discussed. Majority versus minority rule. Now here is where you're talking about something that you must have been somewhere nearby when Gus Savage was ranting and railing. Because Gus Savage, when he was one of the founders of the Chicago League of Negro Voters, and that was one of the same argument you're making in your book. You may have come up with it independently. It's the same argument he made then. He said that there are more black people than there are Irish people. There are more black people than there are Polish people. There are more black people than there are any other ethnic group in the city. This is exactly what you're saying. You're talking about majority rule and whether or not it is in fact the case, and you're also making the most beautiful of points when you say do not accept the designation of minority, because when you allow yourself to be called
and
or
defined
as a minority, you will behave in that way. Please talk about that.
Well, I heard Gus say a lot. I've never heard him say that. In fact, that has been always something that I was being brought up in this city. I always wondered, and I always felt I had a problem with being called a minority. And I used to think that was a negative term to me, to be a minority. And so many of our people were, we're a minority, so we deserve this because I said, well, I've never felt that I was a minority. And then I started counting. And I looked at the population of the city of Chicago and the percentage of African Americans in the city. And our newspapers would say it. African Americans make up 40% of the city. Therefore, they're in a minority because they are collectively juxtaposed against the Irish, the German, the Poles, who collectively make up 60% of the population. But I said, that only works if the melting pot works. And I didn't put it in the book, but the melting pot theory is that we should all get in the melting pot, and then they mix this up, and they mix it, and use our ethnicity, and then there should be a fire under the melting pot to make us melt
and blend.
But I said, once the fire was out, and we looked at the residue from the melting pot, we were always there. We never melted in. I said, so if they didn't allow us to melt, then we should make the distinction between us and the other ethnic groups. And I said, so let's count us first. And we counted first. That was 40%. 40% is the majority of all of the ethnic groups in the city of Chicago. So therefore, if we are the majority, then why do we only occupy 19 seats in the city council and the collective majority the other? And I said, that's a problem. And so then I dealt with that.
Right, and you dealt with how not only does the minority rule, but the majority of the minority, the people who are likely to vote, as you point
Yes,
out,
right.
are the people who are likely to be in charge and who are running things.
Exactly.
And then you flipped it on me, and I said, now, you quote scripture all over the place. You said, now, God is not the author of confusion. And I said, now, Spencer, don't be the author of confusion
All
here,
right.
because then you talked about how a minority plus God becomes a majority.
Exactly.
Well, I don't want us to be a minority. I still want us to be the majority that we are in the city and the majority that we are in the world. People of color are 9/10 of the world's
world.
population.
Exactly.
So we are not a minority anywhere except as we allow ourselves to be so defined.
Well, the point that I was making is that if we are caught in a situation where we can't extricate ourselves out of that, and we are
Okay.
forced to take that position as a minority,
Okay.
whether legally or whatever, a minority plus one,
Right.
and that one is God,
Right.
makes a majority.
Right.
And I'd used the story of Gideon in the Bible, where God did not allow Gideon to, he took him from 30,000 men down to 300,
300,
and then allowed a victory so that
the numbers were not what mattered.
right, the numbers would not matter. I think the numbers matter politically in the city of Chicago, but it's not really. That says, is politics the way that we're going to deal with the problems that emanate in the city of Chicago? Are we going to be able to politically solve our way out of the murders that are occurring on the streets of Chicago in such record numbers now? It's not going to be politics. It's not even the police. The police superintendent has already said they have his fellow officers have no confidence in him, and he is the superintendent who was being interviewed when we had all this violence in Inglewood. Shots rang out while he was being interviewed. The next thing we know, the superintendent is gone. Hey, the superintendent is on his way to where those shots rang out? No, the superintendent went back to superintendent's headquarters. So the police are not going to solve the problem. The problem that exists in the city of Chicago dealing with crime is sin. It's a sin problem. And until we come to grips with the fact that it is sin, and how we deal with sin is how God tells us to deal with sin. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. We've got to show our young people that there is another way. It's not politics, it's not police. Is it education? I think education has a lot to do with it. And I say a lot about education in the book because I'm very concerned about the type of education our people are getting. And if you look at the victims and the perpetrators of all of the violence that's emanated in this city, not only this year, but the last decade, even before, the perpetrator and the victim were all at one time students of the Chicago public school system. Now, doesn't that tell you something? Have we?
That's the common experience. It's the common denominator.
Thank you. Thank you. Well said. And I think that's where we must begin the process. When I was at the Cook County Jail, I was leaving my last year at the jail. I commissioned a study as to what would be the population of the jail 20 years hence from my leaving, which was 1990, 20 years hence, 2010, this year. I stated in my commission report that the jail would double in its capacity in 20 years. The jail has doubled in its capacity. I also stated that the reason why the jail would double in its capacity is the fact that I looked at the residents of the jail in 1990 as I was leaving, and I looked at the education, the study looked at the education of those young people who were functionally literate for the most part. We found that 90% of them, over 90% of them, could not read at grade level when they were students in the Chicago public school system at the third grade level. And I think that's the demarcation line. If they cannot read by the third grade, by 8 or 9, then they are likely to end up in the Cook County Jail 10 years later. So therefore, we looked at and we said, if that's the reason why they're in the jail in 1990, then these young people who were just being born in 1990, who are now 18 and 19 and 20 years old, residents of the Cook County Jail now, just being born in 1990, we did not do what the report said you must do. We have to teach those children how to read by the time they're 8 and 9 and 10. If we don't, they'll end up in the jail in the year 2010. I went back to the jail with Jesse Jackson, as he goes every Christmas. I went back with him after 18, 19, 20 years. It was remarkable that I walked into that jail, and as Yogi Berra said, it was deja vu all over again. The same young people, the same ages, the same crimes. And I looked at them and I said, these young people in this jail now had not been born when I left the jail. And had we adhered to that study, could we have prevented possibly half of those kids from being there? I think so.
And I think you're right, because as a former public school teacher, I do understand some of the reasons that children are not taught to read. One of the things is teachers are reduced to clerical duties. There are millions of reports, it seems to me, during your career as a teacher that you find yourself filling out. And many teachers find themselves writing page numbers on the chalkboard. You know, open your social studies book and read chapter 1 and answer the questions at the end. Your spelling book, write the definitions of the words and write each word 5 times so that you can memorize the spelling. Your math problems do, you know, pages such and such and so forth. So children are almost like little office workers. They sit at their desks, they fill out forms, they fill out papers, they put them in the inbox. The teacher is filling out forms at her desk because she's always providing some sort of data that the school already has, the system already has, and what they do with the data once they collect it in one form, I do not know. But teachers spend far too much time on clerical duties. The other thing is the public school system is a political football.
Yes, it is.
And everybody uses it and everybody exploits it. So that what you have is the Chicago Teachers Union is probably the weakest union of all the unions that have influence and control over the Chicago public schools. And when teachers complain about class sizes or lack of updated materials or whatever it is they're complaining about, and they want something done about it, if they decide to go out on strike, it's not their decision, because there are at least a dozen unions that can keep them outdoors on a picket line until they get what they want out of it.
Exactly.
So
the teachers are exploited in that regard.
Absolutely.
And then add to the equation of all the things you said, trying to defend themselves from students who would do them harm. The teachers should be getting combat pay. The fact that they have to try to teach in an environment where they can be cursed and beaten as a course of their particular duties.
It's not a teaching environment, and it's not a learning environment. How do you have presence of mind in a situation where you are under armed guards, where you're going through metal detectors, where you don't know
You would think you were in a county jail.
Exactly.
I mean, they have more metal detectors in the lobby of your average high school than we had at the jail. It makes no sense for dogs and police and to be in the lobbies of our students have to go through that. That initiates their day, going through metal detectors and dogs, and then what type of learning environment is that? I have proposed, I didn't do it in this book, but the sequel, It's Time Truth Speaks Part 2, will deal with putting the Bible as a part of the curriculum of Chicago Public Schools.
Now you know you're gonna. You said
Nah,
your father
so
sent you
that would be
home
one
to
where-
West Westerwilds when you
So you
had
know
some
that would be one.
controversy.
But I was surprised in my research to find that it is being done all over the country. It's just not being done here. My research showed that the Bible can be a part of the curriculum of a public school system as long as there's no proselytization. If there is no one trying to convert you, but to use the Bible as a history, a philosophy book, a supportive of geography and whatever, the Bible can be used in so many ways to advance the cause of the curriculum. I mean, if you compare the books that are being used now in our high schools now, and I think you'll find some very controversial things emanating from the curriculum of our existing high schools. Why can't the Bible be a part of? And the Bible is so powerful that you don't need anybody to proselytize. The Bible, you read the Word of God, it'll proselytize you just
Now,
by
what
the
will you
reading
do
of it.
with the Muslim or the Hebrew or the other?
I would say to them
faiths?
that I will fight just as hard to put the Quran in the
Okay.
public school
All right.
system, the Old Testament, the New Testament. If there is truth, then the educational system should not see truth in any book as a danger to those young people whose minds will be cultivated by that. So where there is truth in any book, whether it's Time Truth Speaks, but I know that the Bible is the book where truth is spoken in every verse, and I feel that truth as a part of the Bible, as a part of the curriculum of the Chicago Public School System, would be a tool that we could use to turn around young lives.
Well, the first argument you're going to have is with the various denominations of Christians who use different Bibles, because you got the King James Version, then you've got a Coptic Bible, and you've got a number of Bibles. So now, whose Bible? That's the first argument.
That's an argument I would love to have.
Well,
the fact that they have them in there.
You're going to get to have it.
And I will enjoy it every minute of it.
Okay, well, I'm not going to have it with you.
Okay.
You talked about the human power cycle. Did you want to say something about that now?
Well, I was talking about the presidents, the cycle that deals with presidents. If you notice, a president comes into office, he's at the height of his power. The president of the United States, the governor of the state of Illinois, the mayor of the city of Chicago, everything, that cycle begins at the zenith, where everybody is applauding, everybody is so happy. But then things sort of began to digress from there. And then you have complacency comes in. You have inaction, stagnation, things of that nature. That cycle then begins to revolve. I dealt with nations go through the same thing. Civilizations, I think I said in the book, will go through that, but they go from the bottom up. Most civilizations start in bondage. America did. The African American people, our civilization here started in bondage. And then from bondage we went to spiritual faith, and then from spiritual faith to confidence and wealth. And then when we became so wealthy and we had the confidence, then we began to feel that we had it all. And then God has a way of turning that cycle and letting us know that if we don't recognize that it is God who put us there, who who created nations and who creates presidents and kings of those nations, if we don't recognize the God who put us into power, then God will allow that nation or that president or that king to recognize that you cannot be against your creator and expect to exist successfully.
You know, you talked about evangelizing Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
I suspect you would evangelize Barack Obama if you could get
If I
anywhere
had
nearby.
if I had the opportunity. They're trying to get rid of the National Day of Prayer. Barack Obama needs a prophet just like David the king had Nathan the prophet. Barack Obama needs a prophet. I hope, I'm not that prophet, but I hope he finds one.
You wanted to edit one. Edit his speech at Notre Dame.
But I just want to be a speechwriter, not his prophet.
Okay.
If he'll let me write a few speeches, I can prophesize in those speeches.
Okay. And I thought that was very interesting. I had to look back at the publication date of 2010 because when I saw that you had this chapter on evangelizing Tiger Woods,
Well, you know, I
said,
wrote that several years ago.
Really?
And so I thought I would put that in the book, but then I did a little updating on what had, but my original problem was not with Tiger's private life. My original problem was the fact that he used profanity while out on the golf course. And profanity, I didn't allow it in the Cook County Jail. And so I won't allow it on my heroes, my sports hero, because I was a Tiger Woods fan. And I just, when he would miss a ball or if he teed off and went into the rough, it didn't hit the fairway, he would use an expletive that took the Lord's name in vain. And I had a problem with that. And so that's what motivated me to write the commentary about evangelizing Tiger, because if you notice in the commentary, I dealt with his father's prophecy for him, which was a beautiful
and he's a Buddhist.
prophecy. And he's a Buddhist. And so I thought I needed to give him a little help. I said, you were not properly meditating, Tiger. And he admitted that, I think, in one of his press conferences. He said, I had stopped meditating. I said, you're right, you had stopped meditating.
He had drifted away.
Yeah.
Blessing, testing after the blessing.
Yeah. My position is that, that God blesses you first, but then he tests you to determine if you justify the blessing. Most people get it the other way. They think they have to do something. They have to pass a test to get the blessing. But that is not the way God deals with you, and that's not the way salvation emanates in Christianity. Jesus says, behold, I'm standing at the door knocking. If you open that door, then that's a blessing. But once that door is open, and you have been blessed, then God will test you to see if you determine that you justify the blessing. And we wake up in the morning, we don't understand that is a blessing right there. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we were dead for 7 hours. But then God allowed us to wake up. That's a blessing. Now God is saying, well, I'm going to test you throughout this day. I'm going to see if you really justified me waking you up this morning. Or would it have been better if I would have left you sleep for the rest of your life? And so God says, recognize me as the creator of all blessings. I got you up this morning. It wasn't Folgers. I allowed you to breathe. I allowed you to get out of that bed. So therefore, that's a blessing. Now, you must justify that blessing by living out this particular day, because you only have this day. Living out this day to justify my blessings. So if you see your brother on the street and he's begging, are you going to say, you no good bum, what are you out there begging? You should have a job. No, I'm going to take my brother, I'm going to put my arms around him, and I'm going to give him some money, because I have to justify the fact that God got me up that morning. And if I see this brother on the street, God put him there for me to see. He just did not pass by me by accident.
Oh, of course, we back to accidents.
We back to accident. There's no accident that he's placed in my pathway.
Right. You talking about separating excess from success.
Yeah.
You just have all these things. When you succeed, then you have to
Well,
extract.
God is the giver of success.
Okay.
And I use the analogy of Joseph and the dream that he interpreted for Pharaoh. The dream was that 7 lean cows, 7 fat cows, and he told Pharaoh that the seven fat cows would be eaten by the 7 lean cows. Now the 7 fat cows was the blessing. So we go back to blessing. That was the blessing. Now God said, justify the blessing. The justification of the blessing was to take 1/5 of the substance of the 7 years of plenty and hold that in abeyance. And when you take that 1/5, that 1/5 becomes the excess to the success that God had already given you. Because God then says, okay, now that I've given you success, have you accessed the success because I'm going to test you by giving you recess. So you have to access the excess in the time of success when you're in recess, because in recess your success has already been gone, but your success was accessed by the excess that you got when you were in success. So therefore in recess you will have success even in recess, because you accessed the success that you got when you was in success.
Does that sum up where we are as a nation?
Of course. And we can expand that to our nation. God has given America such great success. And what has America done with its success? Have we stored up our success so that when we got to this period where
of recess,
that we've just recess, did we have the ability to access our excess in the time of that recess? No, we had not stored up properly. We took our excess and we spent our excess along with our success, so that when we got to recess, then we had to go and create some success of our own to deal with that recess. And what was that? We have the ability, the federal government has the ability to print money. And printing money, which is fiat money. Fiat money is money that has no gold or silver to back it up. It's only printed by the federal government. In doing that, they are creating success that has no basis. And consequently, the money that they are using now, TARP money, this $787 billion that is fiat money. It has no basis. You're creating success, and God will not allow that. It's not going to succeed, because recess will come as recess has come, and we're not out of it yet.
If you leave the country, this is when you really find out just where we are. When you leave, we went to Ghana, because my son-in-law is from Ghana, and we did DNA and found out that so were we. So we went to Ghana to visit family in Ghana, but we had to go to Amsterdam. And the exchange for American dollars into euros was ridiculous.
Of course.
I think we had to pay, we spent about 27 of American dollars for some meal for one of the children in a McDonald's.
Right.
So that nobody
it.
respects American currency outside of this country. When you start doing the exchange, you find out it takes a bushel barrel of this money in order to do business outside of the country.
Because we're creating it ourselves, and God creates wealth. If we start trying to take the place of God, saying, God, you're not going to give us any money, so we're going to print some.
I'm just so upset because they showed me 5 minutes and you talked about weapons of mass destruction that you said were in the mouth.
Yes,
and
of a despot.
I'm sorry. I have to have you back. Say something about that in the few moments.
I would just say that when we found Saddam Hussein in that hole, I said, well, we finally found the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And someone said, well, what? I said, the tongue of a despot is a weapon of mass destruction. Because if you notice, Hitler in the final solution, he only spoke, and 6 million Jews were killed. They were exterminated, they were burned, they were shot. Those were instruments of mass destruction. But the ultimate weapon of mass destruction was the tongue who ordered the killings in the first place.
Well, I tell you, you sticks and stones, you know, oh my goodness, you talked about the separation of church and state.
We got to come back and talk.
We got to talk about that. I told you, I got pages.
And you have read my book.
I have read this
religiously.
book. I have read this book.
I'm so happy that you read it as you had.
Yeah. You certainly do not want that wall between church and state.
No, of course
And
not.
you gave your example of Adolf Hitler, which I don't know, I've read a lot of things, but I never came across the quote that you used where he said he would take care of the soul of Germany and let the clergy
take care of
the soul of the
church of Germany.
Which
that was profound.
Yeah.
And he said, I'll take the soul of Germany, and for 1,000 years it will be the paramount soul.
Right.
And in only 12 years.
Right. He was
reduced to a madman who killed himself.
Right, right.
That's what you do when you try to deal with God's creation.
Right.
Because the soul that God creates, God determines the ramifications of his soul.
Did you learn all this at Chicago State?
I love Chicago State.
I
yes.
know you did,
It's
but
a great
you
university.
did a lot of reading on your own, obviously.
I'm an avid reader. I love to read,
All right.
and I love to get ideas, and I love controversy.
Right.
I wouldn't want to write a book that people didn't have, that didn't want to discuss with me, just like we've done today.
Right.
And so I really feel so good about this visit.
I'm so glad that you came. I meant to mention your wife, Henrietta.
Thank you.
That you've been married for 40 years.
Yes.
Which is, I have said to you that you're a man of conviction.
Well, thank you.
And when you make up your mind is made up.
Yeah.
And in everything, and you have the wonderful
Well, I've been
family.
blessed with a lovely wife and family, and I got the greatest grandchildren.
And their pictures are in the book. Yes, yes.
And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book.
All right.
I would when my grandchildren are asked when they're grown, well, what kind of guy was your grandfather?
Right.
And they'd be able to say, read that book.
Right, right. Well, you've got 2 sons in the business
Yes,
with you, which is
I'm very blessed
excellent.
with them. Yes.
I'm just so happy that you came to visit me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And the time went by so
And
fast.
I'm telling you, I'm looking at my list and I'm saying, can I get through this list? Because I reduced it.
Oh, okay.
This was a reduction of all the things that I wanted to ask you about.
Thank you.
I so much enjoyed you, and I know
My
that when
pleasure.
you tell people that you